$2 trillion tax bill, who disproportionately favors corporations who are already sitting on record piles of cash. Apple over $1 trillion in valuation right now, with the promise that somehow this would trickle down to the employees who may have gotten a $500, a $1,000 one-time bonus, but who we find are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, which is just wrong. No one working full-time should live below the poverty line. No teacher who's educating our kids should be forced to work another or 2 more jobs just to make ends meet. So a higher minimum wage, and listen, reasonable people can disagree, should there be a minimum wage at all? I understand the argument against it. I happen to believe there should be. If you agree that there should be, then you also agree it should keep some pace with inflation and the cost of living for those in our communities. It's the only way that we're going to be successful as a democracy, and only way we're going to be successful as a capitalist economy is to make sure that people have the purchasing power to continue to make this run. And while we've seen overall economic growth and overall decrease in unemployment, what we have not seen is any real substantial growth in wages, household income, or household valuation. So I think that is an urgent priority for us to address. Yes, I think antitrust, ensuring that there isn't a dangerous concentration of power is an effective tool, and that antitrust to ensure that there is greater competition and greater value for the consumer, and not just what the consumer pays, because if you think about it in some ways, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on Twitter, we are the product right now. So protecting the consumer when the consumer has become the product in the changing landscape of media, that's important as well. And so if you're asking me, are there certain trusts that I want to break up, certain monopolies that concern me, certain companies I'd like to see into smaller parts, I don't know that I'm prepared to enumerate those, but I identify the problem, and I think there is a call for more vigorous antitrust measures going forward.
Did you have an opinion on the AT&T's recent merger?
Not beyond what I just described. I was talking earlier in response to questions about the fitness for the president to serve, about needing to respond to this in a sober, deliberate, thoughtful way. It didn't look that way as we watched those hearings. The questions about what Judge Kavanaugh, then Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, thought about different Supreme Court precedents, how he would apply the law, his understanding of the Constitution. I would have loved to have seen more questions along those lines to inform the decisions of the members of the Judiciary Committee. I think they were understandably concerned about the allegations raised by Dr. Ford, allegations which I believe took an extraordinary amount of courage to raise, knowing that she would lose so much, her privacy, her safety, and have to relive the most traumatic experience in her life as publicly as one can relive an experience like that. And so I understand the number of questions that were asked around that. For my part, I would have focused on some things with national consequence, but from a Texas perspective. We rank 50th in voter turnout. We know that's not because we're lazy or that we love our democracy any less than anyone else does. We know there are structural barriers put in place for some. And we know that we are one of the most, if not the most, gerrymandered states in the union. I would have loved to have asked Judge Kavanaugh about voting rights or other means to address this. On this issue of the concentration of power, the 2010 ruling that said corporations are people and money is speech, and corporations can spend unlimited amounts in our democracy. Corporate personhood, and some of his rulings that preceded that 2010 Citizens United. I would have wanted to ask him about that. I I would have wanted to ask him from the perspective of a state where you can be fired for being gay, that seriously deliberated a transgender bathroom bill, that sought to scare parents about transgender kids in their children's schools, that we know transgender kids are far less likely to be the perpetrators than the victims of these attacks, in a state where you can be too gay to adopt based on religious liberty or freedom provision, his thoughts on civil rights and the constitutional protections that should extend, in my opinion, to everyone. In a state that's the epicenter of the maternal mortality crisis, 3 times as deadly for women of color, a state that has closed down so many of its family planning clinics since 2011, made it so hard for so many women to get the health care that they need and is their right, at least in my understanding of Roe versus Wade, settled 45 years ago. Want to know his opinions on that. So there were a number of questions I would have liked to have asked and would like to have seen asked. But he's now justice on the Supreme Court, and I think it is an opportunity for us to remind ourselves how important this seat in the Senate is, to recognize that there will be more nominations made, and that we need to be prepared to ask these questions and make sure that we do it in the most deliberate, thoughtful manner possible.